And I think we've done, oh, thank you, Michelle. Um, and I think we've done a lot in that time to try to figure out what we need to do to support our surveys. And so since, is it Ella? Is that how you say your name? Oh, if you're talking, you're muted, our new member.
Sorry, yeah, I'm Ella.
Okay.
I'm
All
yeah.
right. All right, thanks, Ella. So
Yeah,
Ella
sorry.
introduced herself a little bit earlier. Do you want to say anything else? Now we got a few more people on the call.
Um, uh, Hello everyone. Yeah, I'm Ella. I'm here in Toronto. I would like to work with the OHDSI and be connected. Actually, I studied Master of Health Informatics, Data Science, and Machine Learning, and yeah, this is my background, and also a PhD in engineering. So I'm happy to be here and to be involved and yeah, to participate.
And we're happy to have you. So
Thank you.
thank you. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Um, Great. I don't think anybody else is new, so I'll hop down to the next agenda. So one of the things we've been working towards in all the discussions we had last year and doing the landscape assessment and our not fully, but definitely participated in workshops at the Global Symposium, is to try to get into a space where we can start coming up with best practices and also a way to move vocabulary forward to support people who want to map survey data to OMOP. And as we know, there's a number of reasons for wanting to do that. Organizing your own data, pooling across studies, being able to use Odyssey tools and things like that. And so after our last discussion on December the 9th, I had a meeting with Anna Osterpolitz from the Vocabulary Group. And we think that we basically have enough information now to start working on a proposal for best practices and go through the process of moving that through the Odyssey sort of system. So we'll meet with a smaller subset representing, I'll represent this group, Piper's going to be representing the psychiatry group, Anna's going to be representing vocabulary, Christian is going to be representing sort of the steering committee prospect, and we also have a couple of members from our European colleagues who are going to be part of the working group. So we'll have a kickoff meeting at the end of January. We're planning to spend February drafting the proposal. In March, we're sending it out to everybody for review. So all of you will have a chance to comment and make suggestions on that, both during calls up until then, because I'm sure I will have things I want to get feedback on and get more specifications on before we do it. We'll get that feedback in March, and then our goal is to workshop it at the European Symposium in April. And they basically be able to do that in person with the goal of then being able to submit it to the Odyssey Steering Committee in May. From there, I'm a little fuzzy on some of the processing, but ideally we would have something approved and in place by the end of the year, which I think is very reasonable goals. So to that end, there's some discussion follow-up. I want to make sure that I'm clearly understanding the priorities and perspective of this group before we go into that kickoff meeting. And then, as I said, as we have other meetings while we're prepping this, I will bring back what ideas we're bouncing around and get feedback from this group. So both, electronically or within this meeting group. So I'll pause there. Does anybody have any questions about what we're going to try to do?
No questions, but that is a great news.
Yeah, I'm excited. I feel like it's been a long time coming. And I think people who've been waiting for answers will also be happy about this. I know vocabulary gets questions all of the time. So great. All right, so I'm going
Nicole,
to,
sorry, one quick
yeah.
question. So the proposal will be on a methodology on doing the mapping, or also on being specific about what fields are going to be mapped, or which sources will be used for
Yeah,
the mapping?
it'll definitely be higher level, so it's going to be more on methodology. Like these are the best practices to get your data into surveys. The other part that it's going to include that I may not have mentioned yet is a pipeline for adding vocabulary. So that's one of the things we've talked about a lot, is a priority in needing vocabulary that is not included yet as standard concepts in Odyssey. So we also want to include what the pipeline is for getting your vocabulary added.
Okay.
But I think more
Yeah.
specific, this maps to that is going to come from people who are applying this and sharing their ETLs and things like that.
Okay. Because I agree that sounds like a good approach. However, it might be good to have a demo or a simple concrete example, because we're going to talk about best practices. There is not a lot of experience in my understanding. I mean, there's a lot. We heard a lot from this group of people that have tried to do these things, and we collectively have a lot of experience in mapping things, but not necessarily to the OMOP and to the way you're going to be defining the best practice. So that's a suggestion that might, even if it's at that level, it might be good to have something concrete, like a simple.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think it's a really good idea. And it's, that goes back to trying to get some use cases earlier. But I think I was trying to collect use cases to figure out what people needed. But I think we could do that in the reverse. What use case goes with which methodology? So like one of the things I wanted to bring up in more detail today is kind of understanding the group's thoughts on pre versus post coordination, or when we feel like we need, triplets versus facts and things like that. And I don't think any of these things are mutually exclusive. I think there can be best practices for each of these, but it would be helpful to know what question you're asking, or what type of survey, or diagnostic or psychometric things kind of go with each practice, and then have an example, because we know we've had people who are doing these things now, would definitely be helpful. Like if this is your case, this is probably the best, this is the best practices for mapping that use case. So I'll go, Ella, your hand was up first, and then Piper.
Yeah, thank you. Just because it's my first time, and I attended for the first time in this year, and I want to attend different working groups. So CDM stands for Common Data Model. Would you please just give me some clarification regarding CDM survey? What do you mean? Like, what you exactly do regarding surveys? Just for, like, it's for research. What is it for? Like, it's not clear for me. Thank you.
That's a good question, and not a simple question, as you might have guessed. There's literally a paper that Piper started describing what we mean when we say survey. Anna started calling it Survey Plus, and that's kind of what I'm calling it now too, because you could list a whole list of things that go with it. And so, Piper, I'm going to let you answer that a little bit, because you've dug more into the terminology used to describe these different things, and then we can get to your question.
So kind of there's this broad class that we've just been sort of calling standardized assessment instruments, right? And we've kind of broken them down into two major categories. One is surveys, right? And then the other is psychometrically validated assessments. And the main difference between those two things is that a survey for a survey, the important information is really at the level of the question, right? So it's asking questions like, has a doctor ever told you you have cancer, right? So it's asking about maybe past medical history, living situation, etc. There's no score necessarily. And so the important information is really at the level of the question. And then there's other things like the Edinburgh postpartum depression inventory, where it's an instrument that's designed to generate a score that puts a person into a category of risk. How likely is it that this person is experiencing postpartum depression? And then within that category, there's things like, we could break them down further, but there's cognitive tasks, where a person is asked to manipulate objects and you're trying to get information about cognitive functioning, versus where the stimulus presented to the person is a question and a questionnaire. So we're still working on sort of coming up with a really solid framework for at least describing these things and putting labels to them so we can talk about them more specifically. So as Nicole said, we're still working on that paper, and I want to open it up to anybody on this call who's interested in doing that analysis to let me know, because right now there's only 2 of us working on it, and the more the more folks we have involved, the quicker we'll get there. And
yeah, I'm interested. Thank you. Sorry to
okay.
interrupt you. Just to know how this survey is connected to that psychometric assessment, which has a scores, like how it fits into data model, how you use this data, because it's descriptive. It can be like sentence, how you want to use it.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Piper.
I was going to say, so one of the things we've been doing is we're looking at, so there's representation of assessments in 2 standard terminologies, LOINC and SNOMED. So there's a representation there. One of the things is that, and then there's a number of other products out there that have a representation. And so I think one of the challenges that we've faced with Odyssey data is that there's no way, so neither SNOMED nor LOINC, actually, and any of the representations of assessments that are out there have a way of capturing the question, and they have a way of capturing the answer list, but there's no way of capturing what the really important piece of that is, which is, what does this mean clinically, right? So we can capture the question. We have a code for, has a doctor ever told you had cancer? And then we can capture yes or no. But the important piece of that is really the interpretation, right? The finding of history of cancer. And that's the gap. That's the big gap that exists right now.
So it gives a semantic aspect to the SNOMED and LOINC data.
Exactly. It's capturing the semantics of it, right? So, and even the score, right? You get a score on the PHQ-9, but you need a way to translate that into something meaningful, right? Into the meaning of it.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry. Thank you.
Yeah, and basically
I'm interested to know more about it and participate in your paper and work with you if I find it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was just saying, and then I was just gonna say, and I think another one of the things that has been challenging for getting these data into OMOP has been that there's things we need to do with survey data that you don't necessarily do with EHR data. So one of the things we've talked about a lot is preserving things like question answer pairs. And part of the interest in that is it also allows us to save negative information. So when you look how clinical data is typically mapped to OMOP, has your healthcare professional ever told you you have lung disease? And if that person has it, then you map it to the appropriate things classifying lung disease. But you don't keep a record of all the people who don't have it. It's just assumed if you don't report it, you don't have it. Now, in some cases, that's fine. You're only interested in the people that do. But in other situations, a negative result has meaning and means something that the answer is no. So that's one of the things that's been a challenge and a little bit more difficult. And one of the things that would be part of the best practices is the ability to map that question answer pair, plus the interpretation or finding.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, different parts of that might be useful in different situations, which kind of circles us back to, what what use cases are supported by what methods? Are there methods that we can't find a use case for? We maybe need to say, okay, this is not something we need to do with survey data, and things like that. Craig.
Actually, you know what, Craig, I'm sorry. Can I jump in before you go? Because I forgot to ask my question that I had.
Of course.
Yes.
And that I was thinking, have we selected a couple of concrete examples of surveys of different classes, different types of surveys?
No,
Okay.
not yet.
Because I think that would be a good next step, is to find, here's a survey, here's a psychometrically validated assessment, here's a couple of different types of surveys, couple different types of cognitive tasks, couple different types of psychometric instruments. Okay. Craig.
Yeah, and I think that would be helpful to do in the paper as well. Like give these examples, but like, within this group, like Diane, you presented your use case at the last meeting. We've got Stephanie Hung's use case. I think we can go through some of the ones from this group as well as elsewhere and see what fits in, how would we classify the use case? Does that person agree that's how their use case should be classified? And then what seems, what best practice would have better supported what the end goal was with that use case. So I think we have sometimes maybe more material than we realize. We just have to go back in and dig it up. And I have to say that's one of the things I really love about playing. I don't know how many of you play with the LLMs, but one of my favorite ones is Notebook LM. And what I like about it is you give it the references and then ask the questions. And so it really helps with hallucinations and things. It forces it to reference what it's using to get to those points. And one of the things I've done a lot, like as we've taught, last meeting when we were talking about priorities for this year, is I literally took our meeting notes, our recordings, some links about the CDM and Odyssey in general, put that in there as the information, and then asked it to, go through it all and like summarize these things for me. And so that may be something we can do with the use cases. Like these are all the use cases we've had in this group, and start, because I don't necessarily want the CDM to do the decision making, but or not the CDM, the LLM to do the decision making, but it can really help you sort through and categorize the information so it's easier to look at and make decisions. So that might be one way we can go through, sort of sort through some of the use cases we've heard in the last year or so and from the surveys and things. Yeah. Craig?
Can I ask you a question? Because we talk about question answer pairs or the triplets. I do want to know if there's any thought as far as linked questions. Like the example of have you been told you had cancer would then lead to a whole host of questions, things such as what type of cancer, are you being treated for it, is in remission, all these questions which are linked off of this one. Mm-hmm. Is that something that's also, as far as how it's represented, being discussed or thought of?
I would say not yet. I think that's helpful, like how we want to think about follow-up questions, because you're right. We never, rarely do you stop with, has your healthcare professional told you you've ever had X? I think, I'm sure Katie would agree to, like, all of us has a bunch of follow-up questions. Connect has a bunch of follow-up questions. It's very rare that you only want that one point of information.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've seen a data set where all I see is like how many days a week, and it's like that's how many days a week of what? Because it's not linked to whatever it's
Hmm.
it's supposed to be linked to. So that essentially loses that in the actual data itself.
Yeah, and that is definitely something to think about. And, if anybody wants more details on it, I'm happy to share. I don't know, Craig, if we've had a chance to talk about it before,
Mhm.
but one of the things I did when I was setting up the architecture, for lack of a better word, for Connect is it's all hierarchical.
Mhm.
So basically you have, for example, we have 4 baseline surveys. One of them is background and overall health. So that's like the highest level. And then you've got, subsections, and then you've got questions within those sections. And we basically do loops, right? So if you say you've had cancer and there's 3 cancers, you get a loop of questions for each
Right.
cancer, and then all those are nested. And I think, Katie, you guys did something similar with the All of Us structure. So I think we're thinking of it within our own surveys, and then we have to think about how does that translate
Right.
to a common data model. And again, what do we need to add? So we've also talked about, in terms of understanding information about these surveys, there's also metadata we've talked that, is maybe needed for surveys that's not necessarily needed for other things. So, survey name, maybe a category for that survey, things like that that are needed. So I think we definitely have flexibility for building things out that accommodate a survey that are not necessarily something that's being done with the more clinical data. But I'm
Thank
glad
you.
you brought it up because we really haven't discussed it.
Okay. Just wanted to bring it up. Thank you.
Yeah. Um, Anything else anybody wanted to add before I dive into my question list? See, there's a comment. Anybody? Oh, thank you, Alexander. All right, cool. Thank you. I appreciate the comments and links. It's always nice to have that in the record. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hop over to my notes. So one of the things we talked a lot about at the last meeting were sort of pros and cons with looking at pre-coordinated versus post-coordinated. And I kind of wanted to make sure I understood that discussion. And so, Alex, you'd kind of given a little bit of the historical background on how survey data was being treated and sort of shift towards mapping the pre-coordinated question answer pair as and then the meaningful fact. And I think that's a lot of what we've been kind of talking about with the triplets. But Ben, and I thought he was going to be on today, but I guess he wasn't able to make it. Ben had brought up wanting to transition away from the current practices of using things that were pre-coordinated in the ICD and SNOMED and the HICF codes. And so I just kind of want to make sure I understand the perspective and kind of what are some of the pros and cons for pre versus post. And I don't know, anybody's thoughts as to what's beneficial in what situation. So Alex, do you have anything to add since I was referring to one of your comments?
Well, do you want me to look up the previous presentation so that we can go through the slides on the...
Oh, yeah. Do you have them?
I think so.
Okay.
Let me quickly find it. Okay, start sharing. Is this the one? I actually think that Masha guided us through this, right? So we had one of the meetings
Yeah.
where We went through all of these stuff. But specifically the problem that you mentioned, whether we do pre-coordinate or not, let me think whether, well, first of all, there are two different aspects, right? One is whether we do it for the source data, right? So how it's represented in the source vocabulary. And another problem is what we actually do when we map data to the standard representation, right?
Mhm.
So it's like two different questions, and sometimes when we have the conversation, then we're sort of like mixing up whether we're talking about the source or whether we're talking about the standard representation. But this is important, right? Because you can have two different options on both sides of the problem, right? When we deal with the source and at the same time when we deal with the standard target representation. I think we have a couple of slides here. Well, this is about the mapping, right? So the way we try to map things from the UK biobank vocabulary, but essentially it didn't work out because you never really know what these small little aspects that are sometimes not even explicitly mentioned mean, right? So you can't really do it clearly. You don't know what the childhood means, what other different things, what the week is, whether it's a full week or 5 days or working week, or so you can't really do that. But I don't think that is specifically what you mentioned, right? You wanted to talk about the pre-coordination versus post-coordination. So this is a sort of like a piece of it, right? The fact that we do the swap, sometimes we do that, sometimes we don't. So when you have your data in the source represented as the event and the value, right? So this could be a pair, question answer pair, or something else, some different pair. Let me start presenting.
Great.
And then we map it to the standard, right? So you have source on the left and you have the standard on the right. In the usual situation, you do the one-to-one simple mapping, right? So you map event to the event and you map the value to the value so that in your source data, the source concept ID and the target concept ID in the target table will match, right? So the question will be mapped to the question and the value or the answer is mapped to the answer. So this is a typical trivial situation, right? I don't have examples here. Probably we need to add the examples because then it's going to be much more straightforward, and I will. But what happens often is that sometimes we need to map the whole meaning, the whole semantics of the pair, of the question answer pair, or variable and value pair. And we do pre-coordinate. Well, it doesn't necessarily mean that we do pre-coordinate them in one simple concept, but at least when we do mapping, we have to pre-coordinate them in some way in order to map them to one single event, right? And that could be whatever history of. I think I have some examples here, so probably we can use them. Well, not really good examples. Okay. Have a doctor ever told you that you had some condition? And the answer is yes, or the answer is yes with a specific condition, or the condition is mentioned in the question. Then you do pre-coordinate these both, and you could map them to one single concept. Now it's not really one single one because the history is post-coordinated in OMAP, but before that we had the history pre-coordinated, so you would end up with the map into one single event here, right? One single concept that is self-standing event, no any value, right? The next case is even more complicated. So you have the event and the value, and you do pre-coordinate them and map to the event the same way as we did in the previous case, but also you would need to do something with the value. And well, you could do various things, right? One is you could map the value to the value. And another case is when value actually explains you what the ETL rule should be, right? So you would use some information in order to create a specific ETL rule, and that could be the name of the table or the domain or like some specific things that you don't really get from the mapping. And again, I don't have examples here. Probably we need to have some so that it's more clear what is happening. But the most characteristic case is the first one, right? And that is really important in order to understand what the swap is. Well, maybe it's not that straightforward, but again, so if you have the question and the value in the source, and no matter whether you pre-coordinate them or not in one single concept, that is more or less the technical side of the question. What is not technical is that sometimes you need to map the piece of information that is coming from the source event to the value of the standard concept of the standard representation, right? And the value is going to be mapped to the event itself. And for this one, I have a good example here. So imagine that is a source. I think it's not the real one. Well, maybe it is from some of the vocabularies, but just imagine you have a question, which is who in your family has had asthma? And then you have the answer, which is daughter here, right? And that is the question, which is the event, and that is the answer, which is the value. But when you map it to standard, if you do, right, because it's not even clear whether we want things to happen or not, but if you do, and if you map it to the almost standard concepts, in this case, there is a history of event, right? And it could be like that specific concept here in the green that would actually mention the family member, or it could be, well, it cannot be really the general concept because it's not the history of the given patients, right? This is the only concept we can map to. So what actually happens, the piece of information of the condition is going to be swapped from the question to the value, right? So the shift is happening, and like you have this cross situation here. And this is not straightforward, right? Because when you look at the specs of the OMOP common data model, this is not that is expected, right? Because when you look at the definitions of the fields, it explicitly tells you that the value is a representation of the source value, but it's not in this case, right? Because you have a swap here. So we discussed this in the CDM working group when we put this proposal in place, and then we found that it's not really straightforward and it's a little bit tricky. And well, I'm not sure what the next steps are. I think Claire said that probably we need to review the definitions of the fields, or probably we need to make sure whether we want this type of thing allowed or not. So this is where we finished, right? Do you have some questions or question on this?
I was still sort of digesting, but I'll open up to other
Okay.
questions. I did want to ask if you would be okay with sharing the slides and either
Yeah.
me emailing them to the group or putting it on the wiki.
Yeah, sure. I will.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, because there's some other ones that you didn't get a chance to go through that I think would also be helpful as we try to sort out use cases or, if then sort of situations.
Yeah.
But thank you. That's kind of helpful for understanding some of what the current challenges are.
Yeah. And Alexander,
Well,
you know what?
yeah.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, if you could duplicate this slide with a concrete example, like of the questions and answers, I feel like that would be really super helpful.
I will. Yeah.
Diane?
I was just going to say that we used the first three examples here in a lot of our mappings. So I can help get examples for those if you want, and we can kind of decide if it's a valid one that we want to use for the group.
That's great. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? All right. Thanks, Alexander. That was helpful. Realize I muted myself. I'm going to go back to my notes and see what other things I had on my list. I think it was all about pre and post coordination. So I guess I'll ask the other question then to the group. Are there situations where you feel that post coordination is more helpful for how you want to map your survey information, or a combination thereof? Because I could also, and maybe I'm understanding wrong, so feel free to correct me, but I could also think of a situation where you've pre-coordinated your question answer pair, but there's descriptors about what the fact is that would be post-coordinated, like how you describe, history plus cancer plus sister, or whatever. So I'll put that out there. And then Monsi, I saw that you had your hand up.
It's more of a question because I missed some of this session, so I'm sure that's clear for everybody else. But what do you mean exactly by post coordination? Is that when you are designing your survey, that you do it the way you think, and then you map it later, or you do it as maybe that has nothing to do with that. I'm not quite sure what you mean by post coordination.
I'm gonna share something that helped me understand it better, and because it took me a while, and I'm at that point where I think I get it, but I don't know that I can explain it well. But I felt, and I can share this link, but I thought this was really helpful. You find it.
If everyone knows it, just share the link. I might, because I miss a few sessions, so maybe all of you are already familiar. So you can just share.
I'm just gonna
Mhm.
show it real quick, because one of the things I've also found as a teacher is one person may ask the question, but multiple people have it. So I'm just gonna pull this up and I'll share it. So this I thought was very helpful for explaining it. Somebody shared this with me. And again, if this is not how we see it for Odyssey, somebody else feel free to chime in, but I thought this was helpful. So here's an example. Let's say an ICD code 100 for abrasion of the left knee, and everything is pre-coordinated in this phrase. So ahead of time you're searching for this ICD code that has to do with this entire phrase. In post coordination, you break it down and try to find codes that correspond to each piece of it. So things like, so an abrasion, left, and knee. And so one of the things they kind of list in here, some of the pros and cons and why so much is pre-coordinated and not. So I'll share the link to go more into depth on it, but I felt like this was pretty nice explanation of the differences.
They're not mutually exclusive, right? You can map two codes that are pre-coordinated according to that example. It's like multiple concepts into one versus
Yeah,
breaking it down.
that was sort of part of my question. Like if my question was pre-coordinated or my question answer pair. So abrasion of the left knee, I'm just gonna say yes or something. And that's my question answer pair. Or I don't know. Sorry, my example's falling apart because I'm trying to do it on the fly. But something, okay, has a healthcare provider ever told anyone in your family that they have cancer? And it's like, yes, my daughter, yes, my son, yes, whatever. And so on one end, you have the pre-coordinated question answer pair, but on the other hand, you have, son cancer type or, something like that. So I kind of wondered, if you can or should separate out, okay, we want to pre-coordinate that question answer pair so that stays together, but things that describe the answer to get us to the fact could be post-coordinated. And I don't know that that's a true statement. I'm just wondering if that's something anyone has done or looked at.
So one observation, Nicole, is that if we map this idea of abrasion of the left knee to a concept in SNOMED, SNOMED represents all of the pieces of that, right? So it actually has a concept model that defines a disorder. So it would have morphologic abnormality, abrasion, assuming it was in there, right? And then it would have binding site left knee, right? And then left knee. So you can essentially get to the pieces of this through the terminology itself.
Okay. That's helpful too.
But again, I guess it depends on the use cases, right? How articulated
Right.
in Odyssey. Yeah. What's more usable?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Diane, because you're one of our example people. Go ahead.
Well, we had a rather odd or very, very specific survey question in one of our studies a couple years ago, and it was, do you have any seizures? If so, what kind? And if so, how many over the course of the year? And so we mapped each of those separately because they were separate questions within the survey itself. However, I could see that either being used individually for analysis purposes or to the point of you want to use them together. So it really would depend, I guess, on your end use case, how people could map that. But they could map it individually and just have it as is, or they could map it as post-coordinated depending on their analysis plan. So in that case, I would consider that a semi-confusing post-coordination issue. And so how would you be able to do that within the framework that we have?
And I really like that you brought that up because it also kind of goes to what Craig was saying about like this hierarchical thing, right? So
Yeah.
would you in one step, okay, so has your healthcare provider ever told you have cancer? What was the type of cancer, then I don't know, stage, things like that, where you could theoretically get to it in one step, stage 3 colon cancer. It took 3 questions to get there, but your fact is stage 3 colon cancer. So that's something interesting to think about. I'll go ahead and stop sharing this and post the link. All right, sorry, I can't talk and post at the same time, apparently. Thank you for sharing the slides, Alexander. All right. Okay, so how are we doing? We've got about 13 minutes left. So I think one of the things I want to do is kind of digest some things that we've talked about today, take another look at the slide. I think, Diane, if you want to look at the slides and see examples from your work, it would be great to review those on our next call. If anybody else has the same thoughts, yeah, Piper?
I was just going to say, is it possible to bring together a couple of examples of questions that we're struggling with, pre-coordination, post-coordination?
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes I think working with some specific examples
Yeah.
is useful.
Yeah, that would be great if anybody wants to bring, or including our, basically
Yeah.
everybody, you want to bring some examples that we can walk through these scenarios. I think that would be very helpful. And this is, this is helpful to kind of sort through some of these things before we start drafting the proposal. And like I said, as we go through, I'll bring things back to the group and modify, but I think this would be a good place to start. And then we could potentially build these examples to full use cases for, what each of the paths we want, we think are helpful to recommend or set up as best practices.
Yeah.
So does that sound good? I think we've got a few examples in the group.
Yeah. So you know what I'm thinking about, just in terms of framing the problem, right? Have you heard that quote? A problem well defined is a problem half solved. So in terms of defining, framing the issue, and this is something that came up, it wasn't a survey, but when we were looking at our flow sheet data for mental health, we had a lot of different ways of framing the assessment questions, which were, psychotic symptoms, and then they would select psychosis, hallucinations, or delusions, and then they had more specific questions, which were yes or no, what type. And so thinking about, I don't know if folks are familiar with Stan Huff's work on what he calls isosemantic models, but I think ultimately that's what we're talking about. And I'll send a link to you, Nicole, that you can share.
Great.
But what we ultimately decided is we wanted to break it down to the simplest, most atomic model. And why this matters is because I think this is really going to inform how we build this out in the CDM, right? If we're creating a separate data structure, how we build that out so it can accommodate all the use cases. So I'll give that some more thought, and I'll put together maybe 1 or 2 slides. If you could send a couple of examples of questions, and I'll pull from our questions around hallucinations and delusions and see if we can kind of make that clear.
Put it together. Okay. All right. Yeah. Piper, would you mind putting your email in the chat? And then since you've basically offered, we can send you our examples to combine in the slides for next time. Okay, cool. Thank you. And then the other thing I just want to touch on super quickly are actually just setting up our OKRs for this year, which obviously are going to really revolve around the use cases and getting things sorted for what we need to do the proposal. And so I think I opened this. Yes. Yay. I love it when I do what I think I did. All right, so I've got this document set up on the wiki for our December 12th notes. I think technically Michelle set it up for us for the notes. I just want to make sure I notice up here, this is one of the things I did playing with the NLM is I put on our meeting notes and recordings and links and then asked it what I thought, what it thought about our priorities. And so I'm not going to go through this point by point now. We don't have time, but the three that we talked about at the high level were our foundational standards, which is really what we're trying to do, these best practices, and the getting vocabulary standardized. So that's the vocabulary pipeline part, and then disseminating this to the community. And so one of the things we talked about last time was prioritizing vocabulary, but I think because of the work that's going to be around the proposal, we'll basically be co-prioritizing the best practices and the vocabulary pipeline. And so between now and the next meeting, and I'll send this email so you don't have to go to the wiki if you don't want to, just kind of go through these and share some feedback, and I'll put some of these into slides, just so we can kind of clean it up and focus it so that we can share it at one of the community calls in the next month or so. And then it also went from these kind of concepts to putting together some objectives. It did add deadlines. I left them in there because I think it's interesting to think about setting some deadlines for these conversations, or how far we can get when, but they're certainly, they're not set in stone. It's not necessarily how we're going to approach the problem in that order, but I think it's helpful to work backwards from a goal. So I went ahead and put those in there. And then it also recommended Stephanie Hong's as one of the use cases we could use. So I think that would be, that's a possibility too. I know she had a conflict and wasn't able to meet today, but hopefully she can join us next time. And I can ping her separately to maybe try to apply some use cases to Alexander's slides. All right, so I think that's all I had. I just want to make sure I touched on that. We've got a few minutes left. Is there anything, anyone else wanted to talk about today? Oh, go ahead, Ella.
I just wanted to mention, I have provided my emails in the chat. Thank you so much. I didn't know if you noticed that or not.
Oh, yes, thank you.
No more questions. Thank you.
Oh, okay, yeah. So I will add you to, so basically there's a general link that's shared with the community, which is probably how you found us. But then I also maintain an invite list. And so that's, so basically you get a calendar invite, so it's on your calendar. You also get the immediate notifications of, upcoming agenda items, or if there's a cancellation, things like that. And then of course, we can also share information to the group through that. So, the slides or questions or resources and stuff. So, and if there's anyone else on this call, I don't think there is, but if anyone else is not on the invite and wants to be, just please let me know and send me your email address and I will make it happen. All right, well, thanks everyone. This has been a great discussion. I'm looking forward to really moving this forward this year. We'll discuss the use case examples next time, as well as just try to finalize our OKRs so that we can share them with the rest of the group. And if you have any thoughts or questions that you didn't get a chance to ask today, feel free to reach out to the group or to me, or if you want to add something for us to add to the discussion next time. All right, well, have a great rest of your week. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank
Great,
you.
goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.